Welcome to my workshop. I'm Andreas. In this video I'm going to build this magazine rack out of some scrap pieces of plywood and some upcycled bed slats. As usual, I learned a couple of things in this build and I'm going to talk about that towards the end of the video. So I'd appreciate if you stick around and watch me build it. I started with 2 pieces of beech plywood. I had to cut off a strip from one of them, which would become the top of the magazine rack, and the other 2 would be glued together to form the bottom of it. After the glue had dried, I made clean cuts on all sides of the new glued up piece. Then I set the blade of my table saw to 20 degrees to make the cut which would make the top of the magazine rack lean away from the vertical surface so that it would actually be possible to put magazines inside it. Then I started work on the bed slats. I sorted them and marked which end would point in which direction. Next I made a small cut into the sides. This would become the shoulder of the tenon, and the idea is that this covers up the mortise, the end of the mortise, so that it would give it a clean look. I finished this step by chiseling out the remaining wood. Then I cut the slats to length. The next step was to remove the varnish that was on the slats. I used a card scraper for that, which worked quite well. I'm going to talk about this later on in the video in more detail. And after that I sanded them, first with 120 grit and then with 240 grit. Then I marked the position of the mortises. I used some masking tape because the pencil marks are not very clearly visible on the plywood. And then I used my router to cut out the mortises, and for this I clamped the plywood into my Moxon vise and used my spirit level as a fence. After doing a dry fit, I chamfered the edges on the plywood and then could glue everything up. Finally, I gave the rack several coats of boiled linseed oil. I used a card scraper in this build for the first time, and I had a rough idea of how to use it and how to sharpen it, and it went quite well. But when I wrapped everything up for the video now, I did some more research and I found some great videos. One by Mike Pekovich of Fine Woodworking magazine and one by Cremona, and they both show very well how to use and how to sharpen a card scraper properly. So I'd really recommend you watch these videos if you plan to use a card scraper. And I have to say it's really a very easy to use and a very useful tool, and I got some great use out of it in this build. I'll link the two videos in the description below and in the info cards here. Another thing I thought about is how to attach the bed slats into the pieces of plywood. And these are 8mm in thickness, and I have an 8mm router bit. So I thought, okay, I'll just route out some mortises and stick them in there. But the radius of these bed slats here is not exactly half a circle. So there would have been the problem that the mortise would not exactly fit the shape, the cross section of this bed slat. So what I came up with was to cut out a little notch here in the bed slat, so that the bed slat is a little wider than the mortise and has a tenon that fits the mortise, but the whole shape is a little wider, so it covers the mortise nicely and you don't see the end of it. And as you can see, it worked quite well. And I didn't do it on the upper part because you don't see these holes anyway when it's mounted like that. You'd have to lie on the floor and look up to see them, so it wasn't really necessary to do it at the upside. But I did it at the bottom and it worked quite well. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I'd appreciate if you give it a thumbs up, if you share it with your friends, if you leave a comment perhaps, and if it's your first time here, you might consider subscribing to my channel. It's always very nice to get that kind of positive feedback, and it's very motivating for every content creator on YouTube. So I hope to see you back soon. Bye bye.